time to join us this morning. My name is Eric Clay. I am the Director of Marketing at Flare, and with me is Mathieu Lavoie. Mathieu, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. So, hi everyone. My name is Mathieu. I'm one CTO and co-founder of Flare. I'm here today as in the discussion with Eric, explaining a little bit of what are the different tactic and strategy that is being used by cybercriminal in order to more specifically the ransomware group into the supply chain, but also on the extortion technique that we've seen and the evolution of the strategy of the extortion technique as well.
Excellent. Well, today we're talking about triple extortion, ransomware, and dark web file dumps. So it should be an interesting topic. Let's start by talking about a few key trends. The first trend that we've seen in is that ransomware is being increasingly commoditized. There's just like with our infected devices that we talked about last week, there's a pretty vast underground supply chain with ransomware service vendors selling to threat actors who then distribute the ransomware. So there's these individual commoditized components. Dedicated ransomware groups are responsible for some of the most high-profile and damaging attacks, much like non-cybercrime. Much like non-cybercrime gangs, there are underground gangs on dark web and Telegram that operate together to launch ransomware attacks. Double and triple ransomware extortion schemes are becoming an increasing problem. A lot of people are refusing to pay traditional ransomware schemes. So there's a pressure on ransomware threat actors to up the ante and find additional ways to extort their victims. And employees are being targeted in addition to organizations to increase the pressure, which goes back to the double and triple extortion piece. So, Mathieu, instead of reading off the slides, I'm going to ask you, how does a ransomware attack happen?
Well, I mean, it's as you described it, a little bit of the supply chain. There's absolutely the infection part, but then also the lateral movement parts of infecting the company. And we see as well two types, so like non-targeted and targeted. So we see groups like exploiting like 0 days exploit, drive-by download. That seems to be like our more like non-targeted approach. We see more targeted approach where we have like insider threats or like specific API key or like specific like technical leakage of an organization being used in order to get the first entry point to the company, and also credential stuffing, which is kind of in between because you still need to choose one target when you do credential stuffing. So basically you choose one single factor external authentication and try some credentials that you may find that is available in the wild to get in. So we kind of see like you have like two approaches, like untargeted, like non-targeted and targeted attack. And from there, I mean, absolutely, the goal is to infect as much machine as possible, to lock as more computer as possible, to create more pressure on the operation as possible. And that's an interesting part because usually files will be encrypted to kind of disrupt the normal course of business. But we see as well groups that are simply exfiltrating, not necessarily bothering of encrypting the file or locking the computer, really kind of just extracting the files. Two things. First of all is staying a little bit under the radar, like making a lot of encryption of the file really caused those CPU peaks that can sometimes be detected by rules in place. So what we see is like exfiltration of the information right away instead of locking the computer, the files, and basically just going in an approach where they do have the file and they will try to negotiate with you, saying like, hey, this is the file that we have in our position, and we are willing to make them public if you're not like paid a ransom. Or basically the last part is really kind of the getting like monetizing the attack. So usually through a ransom process where you're trying to create some pressure on the company and sedate the company to give you money in exchange of releasing the file or claiming to release the file. It's tough to get evidence that file will really be being destroyed. It won't be shared again. But so far that is kind of the promise of like, I mean, pay me the ransom and I'll let you off the hook.
So to recap, there's, we're seeing ransomware attacks are still happening in kind of the same traditional ways that they've always happened. So credential stuffing, leveraging things like credentials and API keys being leaked on GitHub, kind of the broad range phishing emails, the way cyber attacks typically happen. We're seeing different types of ransomware attacks. Some are just kind of spray and pray where they're trying to infect as many computers as possible, regardless of the source. Some are much more targeted. We want to go infect this hospital or this healthcare company because we find they're more likely to pay and they're more likely to pay more money. And then there's starting to become more variety in the types of attacks. So we still have very what I would call like traditional ransomware. So a system gets infected, it's encrypted, you pay to decrypt the system. But then there's also now these additional schemes where they'll encrypt the systems, but they'll steal all of the data before it's encrypted and threaten to publish it. And in some cases, we've even seen cases where a system just has a lot of data stolen from it, but no encryption. So really kind of multimodal type of attacks. Is that a good summary, Mathieu?
Absolutely, Rick. It's a great summary. It's a great summary. I mean, and that's, I think we would discuss a little bit more about the different strategy for extortion after the injection is being done. Will be probably the focus of that. That will be the focus of that for today's presentation.
Can you talk a little bit about what is a ransomware group? And we have a great example here on the right side of Karakurt. So this is their job recruitment post, which I found infinitely amusing. And just in case some folks can't read it, it's the Karakurt team is glad to announce some news. More than a year in the private mode, we now are open to the great recruitment. You can join our honorable mission to make companies pay for existing gaps in their cybersecurity and for the inaction of their IT staff. So our dear hacker lovers, what we have for you, and then they list out like I had to cut it here because there was a fairly long text post, but they list out all of the reasons why they're a great fit to work. So can you give our audience a little bit of an overview of what a ransomware group is and why they're potentially more dangerous than threat actors acting individually?
Yeah, and I think this the artifact on the right kind of show it really well. There's a concept of like mission associated with that. So there's a financial motivation, but there's also absolutely kind of a political motivation too. We see motivation of the actor really driving some of the infection. So some infection are like non-targeted, some are like specifically targeted for a specific reason. So the geopolitics absolutely play a role as well into those ransomware group. What we see as well here is why they are becoming more and more sophisticated. Like they are absolutely looking for specific expertise and recruiting abroad and really kind of being out there in the market as a normal employer could be, and trying to get the best resources out of the talent pool that is available, which is honestly a little bit disturbing to some extent, to see like that groups are being so open into recruiting abroad instead of like leveraging known relationship that they may have in order to get a trusted party added to the groups. They seem to open up the group to some extent to external talent that haven't been related otherwise to that group before. So we see kind of the expansion of the talent of the group. Really as well, like kind of a specializing internally to the group, like having some people that are more specialized into the infection, some people are more specialized into the negotiation of the ransom. So internally to a group, we see as well this type of specialization too. Also we see groups that are more targeted toward distributing the ransomware and groups that are focusing more on negotiation and extortion too. So as well, like there's like different specialization of the group, and inside the different group, there's also other additional specialization per actor.
Yeah, so it's almost like an individualized supply chain where you have certain actors who create the ransomware, certain actors who distribute the ransomware, certain actors who negotiate the ransom, etc. And then this is both on an individual level within a group and then on a group level, which is very interesting. And do you expect that trend to continue, out of curiosity, like this increasing specialization for kind of optimization and efficiency gains?
Have a relevant and like on point example with Logbig Group. I think we'll get forward into the presentation, but we see more and more groups that are actually offering negotiation as a service instead of like actually bothering with the infection of like only focusing on the actual part. So absolutely, I think we'll show a good example to prove that point in the presentation too.
Perfect. And before we get to the state of ransomware in 2023, we actually have a question. Have you seen ransomware threats, attacks on air-gapped networks? And I'm going to, before you answer, Mathieu, I'm going to give my answer to this. It's not something I've personally seen. That being said, I would expect that a network that was valuable enough to be air gapped would also be valuable enough for attackers to want to distribute ransomware on it, since there might be a, it's a great deal harder to get somebody to put a USB drive into a computer than it is to send a phishing email, but there also might be a great deal more value there if the network is extremely high value. Mathieu, I'd be curious what you think.
In mind right now an example of an attack, ransomware attack that use air gap technique. Not that I'm aware of or that I've seen a specific report on that. If you have an example, if you have some reference on that, please send it in the chat. We'll be happy to read to it. But as you mentioned, we've seen some sophisticated attack that actually more like on APT side that were using some air gap technique to get to the final target. So I'm assuming, and that's well still a little bit at the speculation level, that depending on the importance of the victim, we will see some more sophisticated technique or more like advanced technique that will be able to exfiltrate information out of the network device or air gap device, basically.
So Mathieu, we saw, 2020 to 2021, there was a massive increase in ransomware attacks, 437%. And then 2021 to 2022, it kind of things have seemed to flatline somewhat or even out with about a little under 3,000. What do you think is driving kind of like the stabilization? Is it just ransomware? Like all of the companies that would be easy to infect with ransomware have already been infected, so it's becoming increasingly difficult, right? As you get to more and more advanced company security, or what do you think are the factors that's kind of driving that evening out?
That's a good question, and honestly, to be fully transparent, before answering, we don't have a clear answer to that. There's no we don't have a specific answer and say this is the official reason of this. On hypothesis that we have is, we are at the place where it's playing basically the cat and mouse game. So how fast can the company patch, for example, on the 0 day or 1 day, the T and apply the fix before it's actually being leveraged by the cyber criminals. Really kind of seeing the cat and mouse game. For Log4j, it's been more than a year now, but for Log4j, we usually see something between 12 hours between the actual publishing of the POC and weaponization of that POC. We see it recently with the AXXC as well, that was used in order to distribute ransomware too. So we're kind of getting to a point where we have a set of potential company to be victim of that have some protection in place, but as soon as they slip, they could be a victim. And we have as well kind of the group that are trying to get in as much as possible, phishing campaigns and etc. And that makes sense as the number of errors that could be made or mistakes or lateness that could be done by organizations that could lead to kind of a stabilize down, because the threat level is stay the same. It's just a matter of as soon as one mistake is being made on an organization level, some of them will be victim of ransomware. So that's kind of my hypothesis why it's flattening out, because we have a fixed number of organizations that make a fixed percentage of mistake, and we have also the group that are targeting them. So that's why we that's my personal explanation why we see kind of a stabilization over time, because we don't see that much of evolution into we don't see any new way of getting in or infection. It's kind of the same usual way that we see for all the different attack, and we have a finite set of number of organizations with different sophistication level. What we see is we see victim of all kind in the broad range of in ransomware. We see smaller, really small organizations being victim of ransomware. We see also Fortune 100 being victim of ransomware. So at this point, I think it's endemic, and it's stabilized to the fact that it's being there's no specific target that is being defined at the moment.
That absolutely makes sense. Would you say that some industries are more targeted than others, say healthcare or financial services, compared to manufacturing or retail?
Not especially. I think for a different APT group, yes. For ransomware group, my takeaway is pretty it's spread out really.
Industry agnostic.
It's industry agnostic. Yeah, we've seen some example into manufacturing. We see. I think the only difference that could explain the difference of the number is the sophistication level of those different industry. But I think the threat level is the same. The attempt, they're basically the same number of attempts for any company. It's just basically your sophistication level that will be able to, as an organization, to respond better or more averagely to an attack than someone a little bit more mature in terms of cybersecurity.
Awesome. And so the next topic we want to dive a little bit more into the commodification of cybercrime. And can you for our audience explain the difference between like a ransomware as a service business model versus a ransomware group? Like then even negotiation as a service, I think, is one that you mentioned, right? Like it's I'm sure the definitions could get very confusing given the multiple different parts at play here.
Yeah, I mean it's confusing because we see all kinds of as a service as well, and that's kind of probably where it triggered the problem here is like we see some group that are basically selling you the like the kit, so like the payload, the CNC server that can host on your end, basically all the infrastructure that you can host, or it's I mean, at some point we'll probably see some like ransomware as a service that actually provide you the infrastructure to use infrastructure as a service. But we see like groups that are distributing the cryptor, the exploit that is being dropped. So all of this will be basically provided as a toolkit. So basically, yes, you still need to be able to infect a machine, but as soon as you have a remote code execution on a machine, you have all the toolkit to kind of run the ransomware attack. So that is fairly interesting because that is like what we can call ransomware as a service, where you can actually buy ransomware as a service. The other things that we've seen as well is we see groups that will buy like access. So we'll buy access from initial access broker or even like an insider threat, as we mentioned before, and they will leverage that access. So basically, we will buy an access within our organization to pivots and then infect the organization. We've seen as well some like, and that's really where we're going in the next slide. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but we've seen as well like Logbit actually provide you a negotiation negotiation as a service. So basically, like you send to Logbit, like this is the file of this organization, this is a contact, please do the negotiation on my behalf. And basically they will get a cut, I think it's around like 20 to 30% to do the negotiation. And basically they get the cut only on success. So basically we see that it's kind of if you want to specialize more as a cyber criminal into the infection and less on the negotiation part, we see that there was kind of a clear, and that's really what they call affiliate on that. So basically an affiliate is someone who actually drive an infection, drive the exfiltration of data, and then will send it to the Logbit group for the negotiation.
Yeah, one has to note on the Logbit piece here that the press about us and the Twitter handle, it's interesting how many ways the different what I would call like cybercrime organizations or ransomware groups tended to mirror kind of like normal above ground businesses. And can you dive a little bit more into Logbit, Mathieu? Kind of like, did they start as a ransomware negotiation, or did it start as one of the oldest ransomware groups? And just kind of walk through like who they are as a group.
Yeah, they started as a group, honestly. It's still really tough to kind of see affiliation. There's like, I don't want to get into speculation of like if Logbit is associated with any state actor or etc. I don't want to go in that. But what we see is, yes, they started, but at some point they figured out that if they want to grow, they basically decide to offload the infection part. Really work to affiliate, and that make them still most of the most prolific groups in the ransomware, unfortunately. So unfortunately, we can say that this strategy have worked for them in order to kind of specialize on only one part, and basically offload the infection part, even though they are not getting the full amount out of the negotiation.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And we've talked a little bit. We talked earlier about like this difference between targeted attacks against organizations versus kind of untargeted. Like maybe they'll send out 10,000 phishing emails and they'll take consumers or businesses. Can you talk a little bit about which, like, so in the case of the targeted attacks, so getting rid of untargeted attacks, what types of organizations? What are the characteristics of an organization that would be the most valuable to compromise? And before you give your answer, I'll give like a brief thought, which is some of the recent compromises of like remote management systems that are commonly used by like MSPs and IT services providers, I think are a good example of this, right? You could compromise one organization and then use that organization's software to distribute ransomware to potentially hundreds of different businesses. But I'd be curious as to your thoughts on that and other types of targeting criteria that ransomware groups.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like, what is the value of the data for an organization? So an organization that owns data that is sensitive and can cause harm to like a lot of people if this information is being disclosed will like, it's natural, like it will be more tempting to put a wrench on and to forget about this incident. So we see that, like, that's why, like what you mentioned, like VIP clients were basically like sensitive data would definitely make that target more keen to pay the ransom in some case. Multiple business connection and long cyber supply chain is we've seen some occurrence where the first victim of an infection is not necessarily the victim that will be the final victim of ransomware. So we've seen like companies being infected, and then through the infection of that company, they figured out that it was a third-party supplier, or it was a supplier or business partner of the bigger organization, and they pivoted to the bigger organization and then used the smaller service provider or technology provider in order to move to the bigger company. So I mean, that's why we say like a company with a lot of third party that have connection. And I mean, it's like it's easy to figure it out. Like as more people that have an access within your organization, the more exposure you have, the more chance you have to be that one of those person who have privileged access to your organization get compromised and impact you. So I mean, it's a fairly simple equation, but I mean, that's worth mentioning that sometimes like looking at the third party is absolutely something you should do in order to minimize the risk of infection here.
Yeah, third parties are kind of like mistake multipliers. You have X percentage that somebody in your organization will make a mistake, but that gets multiplied fairly rapidly as you bring on, especially like high access third parties, things like IT service providers, password managers, companies that have access to really high risk data or IT infrastructure. Oh, we have another slide on Lockbit. I had we talked a little bit about Lockbit earlier. And I wanted to go over, can you, first of all, tell people a little bit about what initial access broker is, Mathieu? Because we talked about this on our last webinar, but I doubt the attendance is kind of one-to-one. And then talk a little bit about how Lockbit works with initial access brokers.
Yep. So an initial access broker is someone we're selling an access to an organization, simple as this. So an initial access, meaning the first access within the organization, and depending on which access is being sold, if it's like a local administration right on workstation, or if it's a domain admin of the organization, or if it's somewhere in between, more like a server access or admin rights on the server, that will be sold for a different set of information. So what we see is initial access broker, basically, again, different tactic to get to infect the first machine within an organization. We refer to steal a log. So we see some access broker that will buy at bulk some steal logs, and then they will test out the safe credential, username and password, see if there, for example, any single factor authentication VPN, and like use the safe password on the infected machine to see if that works, and that gives like an initial access to the organization. So we see all kind of strategies. Sometimes it could be vulnerability. Again, similar list of initial actor, that initial infection strategy that we seen at the beginning of this presentation. But basically, instead of moving and using and monetizing the access, they will resold the access right away in order to get money out of the first infected device that they were able to compromise.
So yeah, part of that commoditization, where you might have an organization that just focuses on the compromised part and then sells that access to another organization that would focus on distribute or actually executing ransomware against the organization or stealing data or whatever the case may be. And can you spend a little bit talking about what's going on here on the right, Mathieu, in this this screenshot? So this is Lockbit's 3.0, their leaked data page. And it looks like there's prices, and then we blurred out the organization names. Can you spend a moment describing that?
Yeah, so I mean, and also I will refer to the text on the left as well, where Logbit is starting to kind of get more like a relationship-driven organization where they will put in contact the right people. So if you're an external access broker and like you're right with an access, they may use the access right away and like within a group, but there's some chances that it will refer you to like one of the affiliates of Logbit in order to say, hey, work with that affiliate. They will be interested of buying your internal access for that organization. From there, what we see is they offer like, again, like the platform as a service. So basically the ransomware blogs as a service is being part of the offering through the negotiation. So basically you can have your own access to the dashboard and publish data you stole. And again, coming back to the conversation. So basically you don't have to have your own blogs as a group. You can like use the infrastructure of Logbit that is there. That will basically, as you see on the left, is we really kind of all the company in like the price being demand. So basically the auction that's happening for the company's data. Speaking of auction, we have one question in the Q&A is like, do we see group using double extortion, triple extortion? We've seen some group that are not even like trying to like, they do a single extortion. So basically they stole the information, not even encrypted the file, and they just put it on the auction site and say, hey, by the way, we stole your data, it's there. If you want to buy it back, that's good for you. If not, well, it would be someone else will buy your data. So that's kind of the like, depending on the strategy, you can try to put more pressure on the specific organization and doing like double and triple extortion, or you can take a different approach and say, you know what, like getting into the same process of like, we stole data, it's on sale there. We don't mind if it's you that buying back your data, if someone else buying back your data.
Yeah, I'll interject here just briefly, Mathieu. I was talking to a CISO yesterday who told me that a group, told them that they've been breached and that they have the data and that they're putting it up on a dark web file site. And they did this comprehensive internal investigation. They couldn't find anything. And when the data actually got published, because they didn't pay, because they didn't find any indicator that they'd actually been compromised. When it got published, it turned out it was nothing. They had just found some random files that had the company's name in them and published. So there's an element of fraud here as well, right? So you could trick somebody and make them think that you have their data and it's about to go up or be sold, when you really don't, to try to extort payment.
That come back to like a false incident that like was targeting Mendon, I think again 1.5 years ago, where a group kind of claimed that they have data about Mendon. Turns out it wasn't the case. So basically the company did internal and say, I don't think we have evidence of compromised information here. And turns out that, as you described, it wasn't something significant or relevant.
Excellent, thank you. And so let's talk a little bit about, so, you talked about a single extortion. Can you describe what a double extortion attack involves and how it's different?
That you put more than one strategy to get your money. So basically, like the first extortion is like disturbing the normal course of business. So basically encrypting file, locking some computer, basically creating some chaos in the company and asking for money to stop creating chaos. So usually this is what we see. So encrypting a file, mainly you don't have any backup, you want to file back. So single extortion. Then after selling your data. So yes, like here's the, like if you are able to have backup and able to restore and continue business and restore the operation, well, they still have the data. So we'll put like second strategy and say, well, if you're not paying the ransom, we'll disclose them. Even though you were able to restore and recover from the first extortion. And then we see all kind of like different third extortion, like what we call triple extortion or another strategy. And this is where we see all kind of different interesting strategy. So instead of disclosing the file listing that contains some of the file names, and basically getting the word out. So your business partner will figure it out that you have been victim of ransomware, put in those business partner putting some pressure on you and say, hey, would you pay the ransom? What are you going to do about it? Because I mean, I don't want to be indirectly exposed by your data spillage. So really kind of getting the other organizations that are doing business. So for example, you have like a contract or like sensitive information or like personal information that is being like as company A. So basically host within the company's A, but belongs to the company's B. So you can think about like accounting firm, lawyer, extra. So basically they own data that are from other organization. If the law firm got compromised, it could affect other organizations. So by disclosing the file listing, they put some pressure on the law firm because the clients of the law firm will say, hey, I don't want you to expose my file. So like, and this is where we get in the tricky part, because it's kind of a way like, as being indirectly exposed, you don't want to encourage the victim to pay the ransom, but at the same time, you don't want your data to be exposed, because even though you haven't done something, you haven't done a mistake that lead to an infection. So that's the tricky part. We've seen as well more and more the employees being used as a negotiation tactic. What I want to say is they will, yeah, usually we tend to say like bad guys will steal information from the organization and then try to put that information outside. What we see is they will leverage and actually steal the information on the workstation that belongs to the employee and say, okay, we're not only talking about the organization data we're going to expose all your employee and all the PII and all the personal information and all the username password of your employee that we stole on the different workstation. And it's becoming a little bit more personal, because now it's not just only organization data that you're exposing personal information, sensitive information, credentials of your employee, and basically you're impacting like thousands of people. So that is another strategy that we've seen, unfortunately, that puts more pressure on the company for the payment of the ransom.
Yeah, so taking every approach possible, that your third-party business associates, your employees, and trying to exert maximum pressure to actually pay. And do you see, Mathieu, have we seen these tactics like typically pay off, or do we have any data on whether this has been particularly effective compared to what we call single extortion?
Just say it's tough to say, because the reason why the data we have is the data of the company that decided not to pay. What we can have, as much the data we can see, is through the auction. So basically on the countdown of like the organization. So when organization are being there and say data will be published in 5 days and that listing disappear, that is a good indicator that there was a payment of ransom. So the thing is, it's tough for us to know all the time what are the tactics that are being used. Sometimes we see it in the post like, hey, if you're not paying in like 5 days, we will expose companies information. And sometimes we see if you're not paying in 5 days, we'll expose employee information. So we tend to know a little bit of like what are the strategies that are being used for a different case, but we don't like the data we have is so partial that it will be non-relevant to create some assumption based only of that partial data, I would say.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, so right, if you pay, or if the victim pays the ransom, you said, they'll take it down from the file listing. I have to admit, it's very hard for me to imagine these groups are just like taking all of this data and like, oh, we have all these viable files, financial statements, like all of this really high value stuff. But they paid their $30,000, so we're going to delete it. Do we have any sense of what actually happens after the payment is made to the files?
And I mean, it's still on the belief side again, so that's a little bit tricky. We haven't seen the file of a victim that's paid surfacing after a few times on that. So we tend to believe that the promise is being respected by the group in order to because if they don't respect their own promise, it could be a short-term gains, but at the long time, people will start saying like, even though if I pay, you're going to disclose my information anyway. So why should I pay? So we tend to believe that they are respecting their part of the agreement, but again, was it really deleted? Was it shared internally? Do they keep a copy in their archive somewhere for the internal use of the group in order to target additional organization? This, we don't have any visibility on that either. So there are some chance that they keep the data in order for their own usage and leverage the data to make like additional victim out of the first victim data. But again, we tend to believe that they respect their own agreement of not publicizing the files when the ransom is being paid.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And I think the next topic we want to talk about is how are ransomware groups changing? So we started with the single extortion model. We've moved to double and triple extortion. Are there other key changes that we're seeing? And this actually goes directly to a question we got asked, which is, will ransomware groups eventually stop encrypting all stop encrypting files? Will they move to Karakut's model, where they just steal the data and they say we're gonna list it for sale, or we're gonna list it for sale, and it's gonna go live in X number of days?
And that's kind of the outcome of that presentation is all different groups use different tactic and technique, and everyone trying to optimize their strategy. So I don't think we'll see a unique strategy out there of like everyone stop encrypting files. I think this part of encryption, unfortunately, it still creates some chaos internally. It still creates some loss at the company because of operational costs. We see a lot of encrypting the file being disturbing for organization and creating some pressure. So I mean, it depends on the strategy, but I think it's there to stay. I think we're still to see some group that will keep encrypting the file, or at least making the file unusable in order to create some pressure on the organization and creating some impact, some operational impact that will lead to financial loss.
And go ahead, Mathieu.
No, go ahead, Eric, sir.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so one of the other topics we talked about during the prep for this that I thought was particularly interesting is some ransomware groups have like ethics statements, like they won't attack specific organizations or specific sectors. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was particularly interesting.
For the Children's Hospital of Toronto that was victim of ransomware, and basically the group, after it went in the news and like create some pressure, the group say, okay, no, I think I'm 90% sure it was Logbit. It was one of the affiliates of Logbit, and they basically say, no, it's an affiliate. Like we told that person to stop, and like we're not move forward with like stop the infection and don't do and then we won't do the ransomware negotiation, and we won't necessarily go that path. So yes, I mean, again, it's strategy. I think some groups won't care; they will do anyway. So it's really kind of a depending on strategy, depending on the default statement. I mean, it's tough to say that groups are ethical because they don't infect like healthcare group, but they infect all kind of other companies. It still have an impact, and negative impacts on the individual. So we see as well some statement. I think the one you showed for Karakut was kind of a show this kind of a motivation to they're kind of have this ethical belief that corporation can be evil and are evil in some case, and they tend to push that way of thinking forward, and we see that where and we see statement in the group say all corporations are evil, and like we do, like that's the reason why we are here to kind of approve and expose what they do, and they kind of tend to put I mean, kind of an ethical value associated with that, but I mean, it's really I mean, they're not the right approach if you want to do, or it's probably something that you can argue that it's not the right way to infect company in order to expose them. Absolutely, you're affecting the individual, but I mean, we tend to see this type of train of thought in the different ransomware group too.
Yeah, it's I don't want to veer off into ethics and philosophy, but it does seem to me that nobody wants to see themselves as the bad guy, right? It's almost like a justification for why they're doing it and why it's why they're not the bad ones. They're just attacking evil corporations.
Yep.
So Mathieu, we have 2 questions here. It seems that as described, it's not an event happening in a day, for example, but it's a process happening over a longer time frame. How long are threat actors spending in the network?
I mean, for generally speaking, an infection and a confirmation of within an organization take an average 6 months, give or take, to be detected. So we tend to believe that was the same for ransomware. So usually that's kind of a short answer, and like somewhere around six months in average with the data we have at the moment. Rick, do you want to go with another question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on mute there for a second. How much of the process is automated, self-acting code scripts, and how much is manually executed? Search, start of the extraction process, data collection, etc.
Yep. What we tend to see, because there was some leakage, information leakage of different ransomware group as well in the past. So we were able to see the communication, the tools, the artifacts that are being used. And we tend to see that they use some tools, but there's manual operator that actually infect the organization. What we tend to see, it's similar tools that are being by red teamer that are being used by a ransomware group in order to infect and compromise the network and the different device. The good news with that is, if you are able to detect and do assessment and detect the red teaming tools, the casual tool that we see, it's still comforting to know that it could be valuable as well for detecting bad guys, not just your red team, and not just the red team, the pen test team. So I mean, there's script, there's tooling. It's not fully automated, and usually we tend to see that it's similar to a red team assessment. What are the approach that they take?
I think this goes into this segues very nicely, Mathieu. So what are some concrete recommendations for preventing ransomware attacks and also detecting ransomware attacks that may have occurred against your organization's kind of critical third parties and suppliers that may have leaked high value data?
Yeah. For your own organization, I mean, like having some like detection in place, like, I mean, always come back to the basic. I think we won't say enough how it's important to have a MFA in place for your organization, to make sure you have some EDR in place. I mean, that come back to like same approach and same detection of detecting any type of attack from an internal perspective. From an external perspective, in order to monitor your third party, that's where it's a little bit more tricky. For sure, you do an assessment when you start to do business when a third party. The thing is, you don't necessarily continuously monitor the posture of that third party. So having that in place will absolutely help, as well as looking to the ransomware group, the file listing, as well, getting the insight there. We also have an approach where we are able to list the file within the zip that are being disclosed. By doing so, you can be able to get the information and get the heads up early on. What we've seen, generally speaking, is we've seen some use case and some success story where the organization were able to know almost 3 weeks in advance that one of their third-party work was compromised by ransomware before they actually received the legal notice of like the legal disclosure of being of that third party being victim of ransomware. So by looking from an outside perspective into the ransomware group, you can definitely have the heads up and give you some more time to react and to respond to that. Okay, well, we have this third party being breached. What are the data we're sending to that third party? How do we respond to that? Also, like most of the ransomware attack will come to phishing, will come to like unpatched device, will look for credential stuffing. So looking from an outside perspective of what is the security posture of the organization and monitoring that continuously will absolutely be able to help you pinpoint what are your most at-risk third party and assess them. So I think those are simple things you can put in place. I don't want to get too much into the technical details because like some recommendation will only apply depending on your specific context. But we can like feel free to reach out afterward if you want to dig a little bit more, especially on some aspect there.
So Mathieu, we have plenty of questions. So I think I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to switch to answering questions at this point. I'm going to leave us on this slide. If anybody's interested in connecting with Mathieu and I on LinkedIn, you can scan the QR codes. It'll take you directly to our profiles. Let's see. Do you think there's a type of behavior that a group can have that damages the ransomware dark markets for all other groups? And I think what they're getting at is if a group, if you have a group that's hitting companies, stealing files, getting payments, and then publishing the files anyway, that's going to hurt all ransomware groups because it decreases credibility. Are there any other things you can think of besides that, Mathieu?
Yeah, I think it will. But what we see most of the time where you have a ransomware attacks, there is some specialized firm that will be called in order to do the negotiation, the negotiation, and those firms know really well what are the different group, what are the different tactics they use by the group, they can even tell you which operator they are speaking which when they do the negotiation. It's going that far. Like they are able to figure out, okay, I'm speaking to that person. Like they don't necessarily know the identity, but they know it's this person, and this is the style that person have. So yes, it will affect I think it will affect at the public level or at a general level, the perception that people have of ransomware group. But for the specialists, they are really able to distinguish what are the groups, what are the credible group, what are the less credible groups. And if one group started to do short-term profit like this, I don't think for professional it will affect, they will be able to distinguish that group from the rest of the group. But that being said, in the public opinion, I think it could definitely impact all the group if one started to act in a non-conventional way for ransomware group for sure.
All right, we have the next question. You mentioned air gapping before. Do you still suggest having offline data stores?
It's tough to say because I mean it really depends on what is a use case. I mean, like isolating OT device from the IT could make sense. I mean, it's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a complexity to be able to mind the gap there with infection. So I mean, it's always kind of a what is the complexity added into your process and your operation of the organization, but also what is the gain in terms of security you can get. There's absolutely some gain of having some air gap device, but I mean, it's complicated to put in place. It's complicated to update those devices. It's complicated to put, like, you still need to patch those devices. You still need to maintain those devices and manage those devices. So it brings additional challenge. It's kind of a tough, it really depends on the situation, like weighing the pros and cons, and see if it's a good strategy for your organization or no. I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer like more clearly with a yes or no on that question, unfortunately.
Once personal data has been exfiltrated or leaked, is it possible to either revoke that leaked data or somehow taint, corrupt the leaked data so that later malicious actors can't make effective use of it? I don't necessarily mean, for example, making sure your passwords are stored in databases as hashes, but a more general kind of corruption, distortion of the leaked data set like themselves. Has any sort of work like that been done?
I'm not sure there's any possible, because basically you download a copy of the data. So I mean, when the data leave the organization, it's already been stored. So unless you corrupt the data into some kind before, like knowing infection, and like that doesn't necessarily make sense. Otherwise, the cyber criminal will like share a copy of the data. So I'm not see how corrupting your own data will lead to like will have some impact there. I'm not sure as well. I understand fully the question, Eric, here, but from my perspective, you can probably have some deceptive technology, so have some honeypot in place, and like you can that is a good approach where you have some like deceptive technology or deceptive information in your data set of your organization that you know is fake. And if you see any connection attempt or any use of the data from an external perspective, you can have like flag that you have an indicator of confirmation. But aside of honeypotting, I don't see a lot or any deceptive technology. I don't see a lot that is possible with like partial corruption of data. Maybe you have a different answer than me, Eric. But...
Nope, that's that would be all I could think of as well. The next one we have: is there a specific reason why the number of ransomware attacks have remained the same for about the last 2 years?
Yeah, that's a little bit that basically come back to what we explained of like we don't have a specific answer to that. My personal hypothesis is you have a defined set of organization with different like maturity level, and you have the same threat level, that is like we have the same number of groups, the same number of attempt, and basically any day a percentage of the organization or employee with the organization will make a mistake that will lead to a confirmation. So that's why we kind of are seeing the stabilization over time. That is as well nothing to back it up really strongly with numbers, but that will be my personal takeaway of like, there's a corporation with different maturity level would make that percentage of mistake, not applying the patch in times, opening up an attachment, a phishing email, reusing password, having some single factor externally. So those are the type, what I call mistakes. So percentage of mistake will be made by organization, and a percentage of those mistake will be leveraged by cyber criminals in order to deploy ransomware. So that's why we're kind of seeing, if the threat level stay the same and the percentage of mistake by organization over time stay the same, we kind of see a stabilization there. That will be my personal hypothesis.
Yeah, Matthew, it's interesting. It almost strikes me as like a market economics thing, right? You have there was kind of this gold rush into a very immature market where there's a lot of money to be made infecting companies with ransomware. And then as the number of competitors, ransomware groups and individuals distributing ransomware increased, the like marginal utility, I guess, of every ransomware attack decreased to the point where it becomes less lucrative for threat actors to focus on ransomware and more lucrative for them to focus on other types of cybercrime.
Absolutely, that's a really good analogy.
I do wonder, and I'd be curious for your thoughts on this as well. There was this big increase in ransomware attacks right at the beginning of COVID that then seemed to level off. And I've wondered if, like work from home at first may have been very detrimental, but a lot more people across a lot more companies are working from home long term now. So it seems like almost it's at least highly possible that infecting an individual employee doesn't mean you're getting a corporate network. You may just get somebody's home network. Do you think that could have anything to do with it?
Likely, yes, but I don't I wouldn't commit to 100%. Like it's based on COVID, and that's the only reason. But I think
we're speculating here.
We're speculating, but the reason why is one infection vector is password we're using on external access, so VPN. What we saw when the work from home is we see the technology of like VPN and remote access being deployed at mass, and then we see more like single factor authentication and like password we're using, etc. So that could be one of the reason. Like credential that were used only from an internal perspective and didn't have any like access from an external perspective, like switch to, okay, everything is single factor external for the time being, and like to let everyone kind of get into the VPN, corporate VPN, and worked. So that could explain that. If I recall, at the beginning of COVID, we see a lot of like those vulnerability in CVA that were like targeting like Exchange, Citrix. So I think there's also the concept of coincidence of like those CVA that was widespread into all organizations that were like actively used, actively leveraged by cybercriminal. So there was also kind of a timing, probably more like a coincidence there as well, that kind of helped bumping the numbers there a little bit, or impacting the number as well a little bit here. So that's about yes, but also maybe a little bit of coincidence as well.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I'm going to just quickly go over how Flare can help companies prevent ransomware attacks in some cases, and also detect if a third party's been compromised. And then we had one final question, and then I think we'll wrap it up there. So Flare automates monitoring across a wide array of external exposure, ranging from things like stolen credentials that are being given away on illicit Telegram channels to infected devices that are being sold on Russian and Genesis markets. So I would say like one of our core use cases is really helping companies identify when there's exposure that could be leveraged by threat actors, like we talked about earlier. A lot of ransomware attacks are driven by credential stuffing, by threat actors purchasing infected devices, by threat actors finding credentials on public GitHub repos that they could use to escalate privileges and distribute ransomware. So we can help you kind of head that risk off. We have a 15-minute setup, unlimited seats, super easy to use, and we have very, very comprehensive monitoring. And the other thing that's really unique to Flare is we also monitor ransomware. We are able to parse these like multi-100 gigabyte ransomware file dumps and list out, match individual file names that are in those against your identifiers. So we do have a free trial. I would encourage people to go onto the website and try it. The last question we have, Matthew, is some attacks are described actually as an immediate real-time attack, and the protection is turning off disconnecting devices. Does it mean that it's just a final step of a prepared campaign? So I think what he's getting here is like, are there some threat actors who are like doing the full cycle, like day one, like they're getting access, leveraging access, expanding access, distributing ransomware, stealing all the files, and then it's kind of just a very rapid campaign? Or are they just detecting kind of the final stage of that campaign that's already been going on for months?
No, that's a good point, Eric. Before I started answering the question, also one capacity that we have is we're able to kind of extract specific file from log archive as well. So if there's like one contract, we will there's ability on that we have the technology to be able to extract that as well from the different data dump. So two things here. So there's two scenarios that I see. First of all, yes, it was like really quick campaigns that like low maturity level, small organization, the ransomware is able to being deployed like in matters of like hours, and basically like the final step is getting to the point. The other scenario is like, yes, there have been long campaigns that have been like under the radar for a long time, and then like the final step is actually to exfiltrate and then say, hey, we're there, and then like basically being the last step. In that case, sometimes like the organization could be mistaken and saying like, hey, we just got infected and like we just see it, but in the reality it may be like previous infection before that. So I'd say first scenario, yes, like the attacks really kind of wasn't really short term, in a short time span. The second scenario, it happened for a long time, but like didn't have like a valid or full incident response to kind of see all the past step that have been took in order to get to that point, and really kind of just claim that the attacks happened right away. So basically, I'd say the second scenario is more like a problem with the incident response that didn't able to identify the full breach and the full chain of attack.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Mathieu. I hope everybody got a lot of value out of it. Thank you all for attending. We enjoyed presenting to you. Please feel free to check out our website or follow up with this on LinkedIn or any other forum if you're interested in having additional questions answered.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.